He's outrageous. I mean, I can't wait till he says his first word where he learns to speak and go, "What is it? What are you trying to say, Zachary?"
Power of attorney.
Okay.
For 3 decades, Johnny Carson built and maintained what many consider the most successful persona in television history. Every night, millions tuned in to watch the cool, unflappable host of The Tonight Show, a man whose dry wit, impeccable timing, and calm presence set the gold standard for late-night television. Carson's brilliance wasn't just in the jokes or the interviews, it was in how he kept control. He presented himself as slightly detached, always in command, never revealing too much of the man behind the curtain. Former producers described it as a performance. Carson wasn't a fictional character, but a heightened version of himself, crafted carefully over years to become the perfect talk show host. His reactions were calculated, his expressions precise, and his humor fine-tuned. That's why those rare, unscripted moments when the real Johnny broke through became so extraordinary. When a guest managed to crack that polished exterior, when Carson laughed uncontrollably, teared up, or simply reacted as an unguarded human being, it wasn't just funny television, it was historic. These glimpses of authenticity were rare treasures for audiences, moments where America's most composed host became something even more compelling: himself. One of the most unforgettable examples came when Jimmy Stewart, the beloved actor, appeared on the show in 1981. Stewart had long been a cherished guest, admired for his sincerity and his Midwestern humility. That night, he brought with him a poem he had written about his dog, Bo. Nobody backstage thought much of it, likely a sweet, sentimental interlude before moving on to lighter fare. But as Stewart began to read, something happened that no one could have anticipated. His halting, emotional delivery painted the story of his beloved pet, the small joys they shared, and the profound emptiness he felt after Bo's death. The studio fell silent, the audience holding its breath as Stewart's voice quivered with grief. And then, cameras caught something extraordinary. Johnny Carson, television's master of composure, wiping tears from his eyes. For a man who had spent years guarding his emotions, this was a genuine crack in the armor. When Stewart finished, Carson was speechless, unable to immediately find the perfect line or joke. The silence itself became powerful. Viewers at home were just as moved, not only by Stewart's words, but by the rare sight of Carson revealing raw humanity. In that moment, audiences felt closer to him than ever before. He wasn't just the Tonight Show host, he was a man quietly mourning alongside a friend. Not all of Carson's breaks were solemn. Some were explosive, caused by laughter he simply couldn't contain. Don Rickles, the king of insult comedy, had a unique license to go places with Johnny no other guest dared. Rickles didn't just tease Carson, he went for the jugular, joking about his divorces, his salary, his ego, even his control over NBC. Normally, such topics were strictly off-limits, but Rickles, a close friend, tore through the boundaries with ruthless affection. Instead of pushing Carson into defensive mode, it had the opposite effect. Johnny completely lost it. He threw his head back, slapped the desk, gasped for breath, and laughed with abandon. For those minutes, he wasn't the composed Tonight Show host maintaining balance. He was just a man cracking up at a friend's audacity. What made this moment so special wasn't just the comedy, it was the trust. Carson trusted Rickles enough to drop his guard. Their friendship allowed him to laugh without restraint, showing audiences the side of Johnny only insiders usually saw. Equally legendary was the night Dean Martin decided to crash Johnny's monologue. Carson valued structure above almost everything else. His opening monologue was sacred territory, carefully written, rehearsed, and timed to perfection. But Dean Martin in his classic tipsy devil-may-care style, wandered on stage with a cigarette and a drink, interrupting Carson mid-sentence. For a host as methodical as Johnny, this could have been irritating. Instead, he surrendered to the chaos. Carson burst into laughter, tossed his note cards aside, and abandoned the script entirely. For once, structure gave way to spontaneity. What audiences saw was a man delighting in the unpredictability of live television. It proved that beneath the tightly wound professionalism was a performer who loved surprise, who could recognize when authenticity mattered more than precision. Sometimes the comedy was subtle, like with Bob Newhart. Known for his dry delivery and long, slow setups, Newhart wasn't the type to storm a stage or deliver bombastic punchlines. But in one exchange, during a bit about airline pilots, Newhart delivered a single perfectly timed line so sharp and understated that it demolished Carson's defenses. Johnny doubled over, slapped the desk, and was left unable to continue his questions. What made this so remarkable was how it contrasted with Carson's usual handling of comedians. As a former stand-up himself, Johnny had a near-clinical appreciation for jokes. He could enjoy them while keeping control. But Newhart's sniper-like precision snuck past all defenses, producing a rare collapse of composure. It was proof that even the driest wit could bring down the most controlled man in late night. Then there was the week Johnny said goodbye. After 30 years, Carson prepared to walk away from The Tonight Show. The farewell shows were carefully produced, with tributes and memories, but Johnny himself remained composed until Bette Midler appeared. Instead of performing for the audience, she turned directly to Johnny and sang "One for My Baby," and later, "Wind Beneath My Wings." It was intimate, direct, and deeply personal. Cameras caught Carson's eyes welling with tears, his instinct to turn away from the lens revealing how ingrained his need for composure had become. For once, he couldn't hide. The man who had guided late-night television for 3 decades allowed himself to feel the weight of goodbye. It wasn't just a host saying farewell. It was a man processing the end of a defining chapter of his life. For audiences, it was perhaps the closest they ever came to seeing Johnny Carson's true self. Some moments of authenticity weren't planned at all. In 1965, Ed Ames joined Carson for a frontier-themed sketch involving tomahawk throwing. When Ames hurled the axe, it struck the wooden cowboy target in the crotch. A perfect accident. The image alone was hilarious, but Carson's reaction elevated it to legend. He collapsed into laughter, unable to speak for nearly 2 minutes, leaning on Ames for support as he gasped for air. This wasn't the polite host's chuckle. This was uncontrollable hilarity, the kind you can't fake or restrain. The audience knew instantly they were seeing something unscripted, something real. Carson himself later admitted it was the hardest he ever laughed on television. The incident lived on for decades in highlight reels, cherished not just for the comedy of the accident, but for the glimpse it gave into the man behind the mask. And then, there was Jonathan Winters. If Don Rickles could push Johnny's buttons with audacity, Winters broke him with pure improvisational genius. Carson adored Winters, often saying nobody made him laugh harder. During one appearance, Winters launched into a spontaneous 10-minute riff about alien carrots, creating entire worlds out of nothing. Carson sat there, doubled over, not even trying to play the host. He became just another audience member, marveling at a comic mind operating on another level. Unlike other moments, this wasn't about a joke landing or an accident. It was about admiration. Carson, himself a skilled comedian, recognized Winters as a rare talent beyond imitation. Watching him was like watching magic, and Johnny couldn't hide his delight. For audiences, it was a gift. seeing their host not as the arbiter of comedy, but as its biggest fan. What made all these moments extraordinary wasn't just that Johnny broke character, it was how rare it was. In a time before social media, before talk show hosts were expected to share their private lives or cry on cue, Carson maintained strict boundaries. His show was entertainment, not therapy. Yet in these unplanned, unguarded flashes, viewers saw the real man peek through. Someone who could be moved to tears by a friend's poem, who could laugh uncontrollably at a perfectly placed joke, who could set aside decades of composure to let genuine humanity shine through. These cracks in the facade didn't weaken Johnny Carson's legacy. They made it stronger. They reminded audiences that behind television's most polished performer was a man as vulnerable, joyful, and human as the millions who watched him each night.